Hello class, welcome to Fresno State University. For your first lecture today in microeconomics, we're going to be talking about demand. So, what is demand? Demand is the quantity buyers are willing and able to purchase at particular prices. So, then we have to think about what is the law of demand. So the law of demand, according to your guys' textbook, did you guys all buy your textbook?
No.
Okay. Well,
Why we left?
the law of demand states that for all goods and services, a higher price leads to a reduction in quantity demanded, and a lower price leads to an increase in quantity demanded. So, here is our graph for demand. Demand is a negative sloping demand curve because, as you see, here's the price and here's the quantity. So, if you're at this point right here, that is your equilibrium quantity, and that is your equilibrium price. If you increase your price, here is $3, here is $4. If you increase your price, your quantity demanded decreases. So this was at 5, and now it's at 4. So for the same reasoning, a decrease in price to $2 leads to an increase in quantity demanded. This is because when you decrease your price, you are willing to buy more of that good, so a higher quantity demanded. This reflects a movement along the demand curve because consumers respond to price, essentially. Basically, the change in price, which shifts the quantity demanded, not the demand curve. So you cannot say that a change in price moves the demand over here. You only say that it shifts along the curve to various quantities demanded. Can someone explain to me what a shift in the demand curve over here would be? Okay, let's go over demand shifters.
Let me try.
Okay, so the 5 demand shifters are consumer tastes and preferences, price of related goods and services, characteristic demographics, buyer expectations, and consumer income. Austin, would you like to come up and show us what happens to the demand curve when consumer income increases?
Yeah.
When consumer income increases, the demand for steak increases.
So it shifts
So it would
which way?
shift to the right because steaks are a normal good.
Correct. Steaks are a normal good because as your income rises, the demand rises. If it was an inferior good like corn, the demand would shift to the left and therefore decreases because for inferior goods, as your income rises, you are less likely to buy the cheaper products, and you'd rather buy steak than corn. Good job.
Thanks.
Okay, Justin, now would you like to come up and show how the demand curve shifts when you decide that you increase your demand for steaks?
Yeah, sure. Since my increase in preference of steak, demand for steak will shift to the right.
Good.
And if I was a vegetarian, my demand increase for steak will decrease, which will shift to the left.
Great. Chris, would you like to come up and show how the demand curves shift for chicken and steak? So when the price of chicken increases, what happens to the demand curve for steaks?
When the price of chicken increases, the demand for steaks goes up or shifts to the right because they're substitutes. When the price of one substitute goes up, you're going to want to buy more of good two instead of paying more for chicken. Oh, and the
We can like
demand
wait.
for chicken.
You can ask me to
Say
come
it
up.
again. Say it again.
Now, Chris R., would you like to come up and show us what happens to the demand curve for salsa when the price of chips increases?
I could try. I'm just a Fresno State student, but we'll see.
So when the price of chips goes up, what happens to salsa?
Okay, so when the price of chips goes up, the demand for salsa is gonna shift to the left. It's gonna shift to the left because they're complements. Because typically you buy salsa with chips, so they go together.
Good. So when the price of one good goes up, the quantity demanded of the other goes down. And because they are complements, you buy salsa with chips together. So if you're decreasing your quantity demanded in chips, you are less likely to demand salsa. Now, can anyone explain to me what happens to the demand curve when there are changes in buyer expectations? All right, cool. I'll explain it. So when you have the iPhone 5 and the iPhone 6 is coming out in a month, the demand curve will shift to the left for the iPhone 5 because people are expecting to buy the new iPhone 6 instead of buying the current iPhone 5. So demand curve decreases. Our final demand shifter is demographic characteristics. Can anyone explain to me what happens to the demand curve with demographic characteristics? Okay, so basically demographic characteristics has to do with the population and the age group in a certain area. So if we were talking about alcohol demand in Fresno, the demand for alcohol at a certain store near Fresno High is going to be lower than the demand for alcohol at, say, a liquor store near Fresno campus. So if we're talking about what students want at Fresno State, as far as alcohol, the demand will increase in that area because there are more college-age students who can buy alcohol rather than students who are in high school and underage and do not buy alcohol at a store near Fresno State High School. All right, welcome back, class. We are here at our second lecture today, and we are going to be talking about indifference curves and budget lines and how they relate to demand curves. So, Justin, can you tell me what an indifference curve is?
An indifference curve is the combinations of two goods that yield equal levels of utility are shown on an indifference curve because all points along an indifference curve generate the same level of utility.
Great job, Justin.
Thank
Chris, can you tell me what a budget line is?
A budget line graphically shows the combination of two goods a consumer can buy with a given budget.
Great. So when we talk about indifference curves and budget lines, we refer to two different goods on separate axes. So here I've drawn out the indifference curve and the budget line. This resembles days of skiing, this resembles days of horseback riding. This curve right here is the indifference curve, and this straight line is the budget line. So if you have a budget of $100 and it costs $20 per day to ski, you can purchase 5 days of skiing and 0 days of horseback riding. If it costs $20 per day to horseback ride and you still have a budget of $100, remaining on this same budget line, you can buy 5 days of horseback riding and 0 days of skiing. Right here is the optimal point. Austin, would you like to come up and explain why this is an optimal point on the budget line and the indifference curve?
Sure. All right, so this is the optimal point. And first off, the indifference curve shows, given the two goods at any point, however much you're utilizing them, the indifference curve showing the same amount of utility that can be earned on that one curve, given the two goods. And the budget line is showing the budget amount that the consumer has to spend on these certain goods. And it is the same budget along the whole curve. So at this point, right there, it's optimal because, one, it's tangent, and the optimal point can only hit the indifference curve and budget line at one point. And at this given point, the on the given budget, you're utilizing or you're gaining as much utility as you can given the certain budget that you're on.
All right, so now we're going to be talking about what happens when the price per day of horseback riding increases. When the price increases from $20 to $30, you will be purchasing less days of horseback riding. So basically 3 days of horseback riding. With this new increase in price, it shifts the budget, but the budget will remain the same at $100. Because we are talking about budget lines and indifference curves, on a graph, there are an infinite number of indifference curves. So the new indifference curve would be right here, and the optimal point where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve is at this point right here. So we have two optimal points on two different indifference curves, but it is the same budget. Okay, so Chris, can you come up and explain please how these two optimal points are going to create a demand curve?
Okay, so we are trying to find the demand of horseback riding by looking at these optimal points. So at the first budget line, the optimal point lies at about 2. And on the second budget line, our optimal point is at approximately 1 day of horseback riding. So we take where the first budget line, we have approximately 2 days of horseback riding. The price of that budget line was $20. So we're going to plot that point about right there. And then for our second budget line, we have the optimal point at about 1 when the price is 30. So we're starting to see, if we can connect these dots and assume more dots, we're starting to see our demand curve form based off of the points on our optimal points on our budget lines.
Great job, Chris. So as we can relate back to our first lecture, we know from demand that as your price increases from $20 to $30, your quantity demanded is going to decrease. So it moves from 2 to 1, and we see this negative sloping demand curve.